Next, we'll hear from Fiona, PhD student in the social psychology department.
Okay, hi everybody. I hope you can hear me and see my slides.
Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Fiona. I am a third-year PhD student here in NYU. And today I will be briefly talking to you about one of the line of research that is ongoing in my lab, the Heilman lab. We're mostly interested in gender stereotypes in the workplace dynamics. So gender stereotypes in organizational settings, pretty much. So today, the line of work that I'm going to present on aims to take another look at the gender effects that result in what we know as a think manager, think mill effect. And this effect pretty much suggests that there's always this strong overlap between those important attributes of successful managers and the stereotypes that we ascribe to men, but not between the stereotypes of women and that of managers. So women are generally not thought of as possessing those qualities that are necessary for success in like managerial roles or leadership roles. And this effect is very strong. It's been the foundation of a lot of the theories of gender stereotypes and how it affects women in the workplace in different ways. However, the problem arises when you realize that the findings of this study and all the replications that follow are based on targets that are described as men and women in general. Now, this men and women in general labels assume that this effect applies to men and women similarly, different men and women similarly, but in fact, studies have found that these kind of in general labels act as a proxy for white men and women specifically, such that when people think of men and women in general, they're more likely to think of men and women who are white as compared to men and women of other races. So this brings up the question of whether this effect is actually that generalizable, whether it affects different men and women of different races, given that when you look at racial stereotypes themselves, they affect leadership perceptions and they also very actively interact with gender stereotypes to affect perceptions in that way as well. So the study that I'm presenting today, we use a very similar paradigm to all the studies that study this effect of think manager, think mill. We got an online sample of participants and then we assign them to one of these 7 conditions. So everybody was rating one of these conditions. They either rated a successful manager, they either rated men in general or women in general, Black men or women, Black men or Black women, and then Asian men or Asian women. And then we asked them to just rate what they thought that typical person in their condition was like on a scale of 1 to 7. We gave them a list of attributes to rate what's on where their typical person in the condition would fall. And then after we got those ratings, we made that think manager, think mill comparison that is normally made, where you compare the successful manager to all these different conditions to see which ones are significantly different from the successful manager and which ones are no different from the successful manager. So today I'll be focusing on two skills of interest. Now these 2 skills are normally the most used. They capture the basic qualities that have been consistently found to be important for someone to be seen as a successful manager. So first we have the leadership competence scale, which directly assesses your ability to kind of be a good leader, that natural proclivity towards leadership. And then we have the assertiveness skill, which just as the name suggests, it measures one's tendency to be assertive, to be able to take charge and kind of be in control of situations. So in general, we expected that these 2 skills would show that think manager, think mill effect when we consider men and women in general, because that is how it has normally been studied. However, when we add race to that equation, that is for the Black condition and for the Asian condition, we didn't really expect to see that think manager, think mill pattern played out. We expected that the racial stereotypes that already exist would kind of interact with those gender stereotypes that result in that effect. So specifically, we predicted for our leadership competence scale that Black men, unlike men in general, would not be rated as equally competent as successful managers because of the existing racial stereotypes of Blacks. Likewise, Asian women will be rated as equally competent as successful managers. And then for our assertiveness scale, we predicted that Asian men would not be rated as just as assertive as managers, unlike men in general, and also Black women will be rated as just as assertive as successful managers, unlike women in general. So this is just to show that we expect that interaction between gender and race in these different scales. So just to kind of orient you to the kind of skills that I'm going to be presenting on today, this is how they're going to look like. The y-axis is the scale ratings from 1 to 7. The x-axis is the conditions that we're interested in. And for these graphs, all the other conditions are going to be compared to this green bar, which is a successful manager group. And when you see an asterisk on top of a particular bar, that means that that group, in this case, women in general, is significantly different from this green bar, which is successful manager. So in this example that I have here, women in general are significantly different from managers, but men in general are no difference because there's no asterisk on top. And whenever you see the green check, it means that we actually observed the think manager, think male, where men are life leaders and women are not. When you see the red cross, it means we didn't observe the think manager, think male effect. Okay, so for the first skill, which is the leadership competence, we see a replication of this think manager, think male effects, just like we were expecting. There's a significant difference between the managers and the women in general, but no difference between the men in general and the managers. And then moving on to the Asian condition, we actually also saw the think manager, think male effects play out here, which was contrary to what we predicted. So here, Asian men are no different from the managers, but Asian women are significantly lower on leadership competence as compared to the successful managers. However, when you move on to the Black condition, we see our first discrepancy, which is in line with what we predicted. So here, there's no think manager, think male effects because Black men and Black women are both rated as lower than successful managers. So for leadership competence, for this skill, it appears that at least for the Black men and women condition, racial stereotypes did moderate that think manager, think male effect, and those gender effects were kind of wiped out in this case. And then second skill, which is the assertiveness skill. Again, we start with the perfect replication of the original think manager, think male. Men in general are no different from managers, but women in general are significantly lower on assertiveness as compared to managers. And then moving on to the Asian condition, there's another discrepancy where Asian men and Asian women are both rated as lower on assertiveness as compared to the manager, which is in line with our predictions, taking into consideration the racial stereotype of Asians being unassertive. And then for the Black condition, we see a flip of the situation where both Black men and Black women are rated as no different from the manager when assertiveness is concerned, again, in line with our predictions and also in line with existing racial stereotypes of Blacks being assertive and that interacting with whatever gender stereotypes exist. So here, at least for assertiveness, we have the situation where when you add race to that equation, it kind of changes that think manager, think male pattern that we expect for each race differently. Okay, so let's go back to the predictions that we made earlier to see what we found to kind of summarize. For our leadership competence skill, we indeed found that Black men were not rated as equally competent. They were rated as lower on competence, unlike men in general as compared to the manager. What we didn't find, however, was that Asian women were rated as equally competent. They were actually rated as less competent than a successful manager, just like women in general. For our assertiveness scale, Asian men were indeed rated as less assertive, unlike men in general, as compared to the successful manager. And Black women were also rated as just as assertive as successful managers, unlike women in general. So just to put everything together, we did find a lot of support for our predictions, for our hypothesis, and these findings have very important implications. Probably most notable is this idea that considering race in these general gender effects can be very crucial in understanding how these different identities affect perceptions in terms of perceived leadership abilities. Men and women of different races have different overlaps with the successful manager. So these gender effects of men being like managers and women not being like managers may not be as clear cut. It might actually have a lot of nuances going on there. So I'll end here. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to my lab and my advisor. This is an ongoing project, so if you ever want to reach out about it, that's my email. You can just feel free to use it. Thank you.